The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. God is love. Two quotes, both from the Bible, yet they paint starkly different pictures of God. The first from Exodus 15.3 in the Old Testament portrays God as a warrior. The second from 1 John 4:8 in the New Testament describes God simply as love. How can these contrasting descriptions exist within the same holy book? Is the God of the Old Testament truly different from the God of the New Testament? Welcome to the Bible Stories. Today we're diving into one of the most intriguing and often debated topics in biblical studies, the perceived differences between God's portrayal in the Old and New Testaments. Please kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more biblical stories. Many readers of the Bible have noticed what seems to be a shift in God's character. In the Old Testament, we often encounter stories of divine judgment, strict laws, and even divine wrath. The God we meet there is frequently described as jealous, angry, and punishing. But then we turn the page to the New Testament, and we're introduced to Jesus, who preaches love, forgiveness, and grace. We read about a God who is described as a loving father, eager to reconcile with his children. So what's going on here? Has God changed? Are we dealing with two different deities? Or is there more to this story than meets the eye? In the next 18 minutes, we'll explore these questions. We'll look at key characteristics and stories from both testaments, examine the continuity between them, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a more nuanced understanding of God's portrayal throughout the Bible. So let's start our journey at the beginning with the God of the Old Testament. When we open the pages of the Old Testament, we encounter a God who often seems very different from the one we meet in the New Testament. Let's explore some of the characteristics commonly associated with the God of the Old Testament. One, characteristics often associated with OT God: justice and wrath, or lawgiver and judge. Two primary characteristics often linked to the Old Testament: God are his justice and wrath, and his role as a lawgiver and judge. 1. Justice and wrath. Throughout the Old Testament, we see God upholding justice and punishing sin. His wrath is often described as a response to human wickedness and disobedience. Nehemiah 1:2, the Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is filled with wrath. 2. Lawgiver and judge. In the Old Testament, God establishes laws for his people and judges them based on their adherence to these laws. Exodus 20:1-2. And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. This verse introduces the Ten Commandments, one of the most famous sets of laws given by God in the Old Testament. 2. Key examples. Let's look at 3 key examples that illustrate these characteristics. 1. The flood, Genesis 6-9. In this story, God sees that human wickedness has become great on the earth. His response is to send a flood to destroy all life, except for Noah and his family, who found favor in God's eyes. Show verse on screen, Genesis 6:5-7. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created. 2. Destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19. God destroys these cities because of their great sin. This story showcases both God's judgment and his mercy as he saves Lot and his family. 3. The 10 plagues, Exodus 7:2-12. In this narrative, God sends 10 plagues upon Egypt to persuade Pharaoh to release the Israelites from slavery. Each plague demonstrates God's power and his commitment to his people. Exodus 7:4-5. I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment, I will bring out my divisions, my people the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. 3. Covenant relationship with Israel. Central to understanding the Old Testament God is his covenant relationship with Israel. 1. Promises and blessings. God makes promises to bless Israel if they remain faithful to him. Deuteronomy 28:1-2. If you fully obey the Lord your God, he will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. 2. Punishments for disobedience. However, this covenant also includes consequences for disobedience. Deuteronomy 28:15. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. This covenant structure reflects the justice-oriented nature of God's relationship with Israel in the Old Testament. As we've seen, the Old Testament often portrays God as a powerful, just, and sometimes wrathful deity, upholding his laws and punishing disobedience. But is this the complete picture? In our next segment, we'll explore how God is portrayed in the New Testament, and you might be surprised by what we find. As we turn the pages to the New Testament, we encounter a portrayal of God that might seem quite different at first glance. However, it's crucial to remember that we're still talking about the same God. The God of the New Testament is the same God of the Old Testament, but through Jesus, we gain new insights into his nature and his plan for humanity. 1. Characteristics often associated with NT God: love and grace, forgiveness and mercy. In the New Testament, 2 characteristics of God are particularly emphasized. 1. Love and grace. The New Testament frequently portrays God as a loving Father, offering his grace freely to all. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. 2. Forgiveness and mercy. We see a strong emphasis on God's forgiveness and mercy, often exemplified through Jesus' teachings and actions. Ephesians 2:4-5. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. Even when we were dead in transgressions, it is by grace you have been saved. Please kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more biblical stories. 2. Key examples. Let's look at some key examples that illustrate these characteristics. 1. Jesus' teachings on love and forgiveness. Jesus repeatedly emphasized love and forgiveness in his teachings. He even taught us to love our enemies, a radical concept at the time. Show verse on screen, Matthew 5:44. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. 2. Parables of the prodigal son, Luke 15:11-32, and lost sheep, Luke 15:3-7. These parables powerfully illustrate God's love and forgiveness. In the prodigal son, the Father's unconditional love and forgiveness mirror God's attitude towards us. The lost sheep shows God's relentless pursuit of even one lost soul. 3. New covenant through Jesus. A key aspect of the New Testament is the establishment of a new covenant through Jesus. This doesn't mean we're dealing with a new God, but rather a new way of relating to the same God. 1. Salvation by grace through faith. Under this new covenant, salvation comes not through strict adherence to the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. Ephesians 2:8-9. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. 2. Emphasis on inner transformation. The focus shifts from external obedience to internal transformation. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here. It's important to understand that Jesus didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. He set himself in. Matthew 5:17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. This fulfillment brought about a change in how we relate to the law. Instead of following it out of fear of punishment, we're called to follow it out of love for God and for our neighbors. As we've seen, the New Testament provides us with a deeper understanding of God's nature, emphasizing his love, grace, and mercy. But remember, this isn't a different God from the Old Testament. It's the same God revealing more of his nature through Jesus Christ. In our next segment, we'll explore how we can reconcile these seemingly different portrayals of God. Now that we've explored how God is portrayed in both the Old and New Testaments, let's address the elephant in the room. How do we reconcile these seemingly different portrayals? The key is understanding. that we're dealing with one unchanging God who has progressively revealed his nature to humanity over in time. One, continuity between OT and NT. First, let's look at the continuity between the Old and New Testaments. One, God's unchanging nature. Malachi 3:6 and Hebrews 13:8. In Malachi 3:6, God says, I, the Lord, do not change. This is echoed in the New Testament in Hebrews 13:8, which states, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. These verses remind us that we're dealing with one unchanging God throughout the entire Bible. 2, love and mercy in OT, Psalm 103:8 and Lamentations 3:22-23. While we often associate love and mercy with the New Testament, they're present in the Old Testament too. Psalm 103:8 describes God as compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. Lamentations 3:22-23 speaks of God's mercies that are new every morning. 3, justice and judgment in NT, Acts 5:1-11 and Revelation. Conversely, the New Testament isn't devoid of justice and judgment. In Acts 5, we see God's judgment on Ananias and Sapphira. The book of Revelation also contains numerous examples of God's judgment. 2, progressive revelation. Now let's explore the concept of progressive revelation. 1, God revealing more of his nature over time. Throughout biblical history, God has gradually revealed more of his nature to humanity. This doesn't mean God changed, but rather that our understanding of him has deepened over time. 2, Jesus as the fullest revelation of God. Hebrews 1:1-1:3. Hebrews 1:1-1:3 tells us that while God spoke in various ways in the past, he has now spoken to us by his Son, who is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. It's crucial to understand that Jesus didn't come to introduce a new God or to abolish the law. As he said, in Matthew 5:17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Jesus came to change our relationship with the law and to provide the fullest revelation of God's nature. This change in our relationship with the law is significant. Instead of following the law out of fear of punishment, we're now called to follow it out of love for God and for our neighbors. This shift reflects a deeper understanding of God's ultimate purpose for the law. Please kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more biblical stories. As we reconcile these different portrayals of God, we must remember that only one God exists throughout the Bible. The God of justice and wrath in the Old Testament is the same God of love and grace in the New Testament. What changed was not God himself, but the depth of our understanding of his nature, culminating in the revelation through Jesus Christ. As we wrap up our exploration of God's portrayal in the Old and New Testaments, let's recap what we've discovered and consider its implications for our faith journey. Throughout this video, we've seen that 1, the Old Testament often portrays God as a righteous judge, emphasizing his justice and wrath against sin. 2, the New Testament highlights God's love, grace, and mercy, especially through the teachings and actions of Jesus Christ. 3, despite these apparent differences, we're dealing with one unchanging God throughout the entire Bible. 4, Jesus didn't come to introduce a new God or to abolish the law, but to fulfill it and change our relationship with it. It's crucial to understand that Jesus came to change how we relate to God's law. As he said in Matthew 5:17, I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. This fulfillment means we now follow God's law out of love rather than fear of punishment. 5, God has progressively revealed his nature throughout history, with Jesus being the fullest revelation of who God is. 2, invitation for viewers to study both Testaments. I encourage you all to dive deep into both the Old and New Testaments. Each provides invaluable insights into God's nature and his plan for humanity. Remember, it's the same God speaking throughout the entire Bible. The Old Testament lays the foundation, and the New Testament builds upon it, revealing God's ultimate plan of salvation through Jesus Christ. Now, I'd love to hear from you. How has this exploration of God's portrayal in the Old and New Testaments impacted your understanding of his nature? Has it changed how you view your relationship with God's law? Please share your thoughts, questions, or personal insights in the comments section below. Your perspective could help others in their faith journey. As we close, let's remember, there is only one God from Genesis to Revelation. He hasn't changed. Rather, our understanding of him has deepened over time. Jesus came not to abolish the law or introduce a new God, but to fulfill the law and reveal God's nature more fully than ever before. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of God's character throughout the Bible. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep growing in your faith. Please kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more biblical stories.